Welcome to the first video in a series of 3 videos on situation ethics. In this video, we're going to look at what Fletcher says about the positions he calls legalism and antinomianism, and why he therefore advocates his situation ethics as an alternative to these two positions. So, a legalist is someone who enters every moral decision complete with a set of moral principles, rules, and laws they can simply apply to the situation and all other situations. Fletcher will accuse legalists of blindly following moral rules without considering the individual situations. Ethical systems that follow a legalist approach include deontological approaches like Kantian ethics. So, for example, Kant will imply that it's always wrong to lie. It's never right to lie, even if lying could save lives. So this is very legalist. And another one, the Catholic Church interpretation of natural law. That's another one. So they say, for example, that contraception is always immoral. There's never a situation in which it could be right. Fletcher, of course, disagrees with that. To take an extreme example, it's a good example, but not good in the moral sense. But it is a good example. It comes from Saudi Arabia in 2002, when religious police prevented a group of girls escaping a burning building because they deemed them not to be wearing appropriate clothing. 15 girls died in that fire. Fletcher's criticism of legalism is that ethical decision-making It puts law ahead of love in its ethical decision-making. As such, the strict adherence to rules can lead to all sorts of immoral behaviour, like the persecution of homosexuals. Fletcher summarises the legalist by applying a quote by Mark Twain to legalists. So he says, the legalist is, quote, a good man in the worst sense of the word. Antinomianism. So an antinomian is someone who enters a moral decision-making situation with no moral principles, rules or laws at all. They rely entirely on the situation itself, and they make their moral decision there and then. They might look to, say, conscience or intuition or for their moral answers. Fletcher uses the example of Gnosticism. So the Gnostics were a group of early Christians who believed that they had special knowledge such that they didn't require principles or rules in moral decision-making. They would just simply know what was right. Fletcher rejects both these positions. He advocates instead a third approach, which he calls situation ethics. So the situationist rejects legalism because the situationist rejects the idea that there are a multitude of moral laws, rules and principles. Instead, there is only one moral law, and that is, in moral situations, to do the most loving thing. As such, situationists also reject antinomianism because for them there were no laws at all. But they do take from antinomianism this idea of making moral decisions in the situation there and then. So what you get with situation ethics is this idea that in moral decision making we ought to do the most loving thing in every individual situation. And this might mean that sometimes something is right in one situation which turns out to be wrong in another situation because it's the most loving thing over here, but it's not the most loving thing at this time. So it might therefore be right to sometimes lie, because your lying might save lives. That might be the most loving thing. Now Fletcher just concede that we could, he's saying there's no laws and principles and all of this, but he just concede you could derive some moral principles from this approach, because for instance it would be typical that murdering someone would rarely be the most loving thing. Normally, if you're murdering someone, that's not a loving thing. So you can draw principles of that sort, but they would only be generalizations. There might be some situations where murdering someone turns out to be the most loving thing. Imagine going back in time and murdering Hitler. That might be a loving thing. Some people did try to assassinate Hitler while he was alive. Maybe that was the most loving thing. And Fletcher even goes so far to say that we ought to disobey the Ten Commandments if it's the most loving thing to do so. Now this is pretty radical for a Christian, right? Because Joseph Fletcher is a Christian. This is really a Christian ethical theory, but it's important to understand here that Fletcher takes as the foundation of situation ethics the teachings of Jesus. And Jesus taught, for instance, one of the things he is well known for saying is that the most important commandment, he says, is to love God. And the second most important commandment is to love your neighbour as yourself. And so if you understand that, you can see how situation ethics can emerge from that. In what we should do is not just follow laws in a book, but we should do the most loving thing.